Have you ever felt like your life could change with a single decision, but when the moment finally arrived, you hesitated? The application was ready. The business idea was ready. The opportunity was right in front of you. The email was written. The video was finished. Everything was prepared. And somehow you didn't move. Not because you were lazy. Not because you lacked discipline. Not because the timing was wrong. You told yourself you needed a little more time. A little more preparation. A little more certainty. Tomorrow would be better. Next week would be better. After one more book, one more course, one more plan. But tomorrow came. And the same thing happened again and again. And eventually something strange begins to happen. The opportunity disappears. The idea loses momentum. The excitement fades. And all you're left with is a quiet question. Why do I keep doing this? Why do intelligent people repeatedly avoid the very things they say they want? Why do people sabotage opportunities they spent years hoping for? Most people blame motivation. Others blame discipline. But what if the real reason is something far deeper? What if there's an invisible belief operating beneath your awareness, quietly protecting the very life you're trying to escape? Because according to decades of psychological research, that may be exactly what's happening. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why some beliefs survive untouched for decades, why positive thinking so often fails, why self-sabotage feels perfectly rational when it's happening, and what psychology has discovered about changing beliefs that have been shaping your decisions for years. Not motivation, not inspiration, science. Here's something that rarely gets said clearly. You do not experience reality directly. You experience your interpretation of reality. And that interpretation is shaped by beliefs. Some of them helpful, some of them destructive, most of them invisible. Imagine two people receiving the exact same email. We'd like to invite you for an interview. One person feels excited. The other immediately assumes there must be a mistake. Same email, different reality. Why? Because beliefs act like filters. Psychologists often refer to deeply rooted beliefs as core beliefs. They're not opinions, they're not preferences. They feel like facts. That's what makes them so powerful. A person who believes they are not good enough rarely walks around repeating those words to themselves. Instead, they hesitate before applying. They stay silent when they have something valuable to say. They dismiss compliments. They over-prepare. They procrastinate. They convince themselves they need more time. From the inside, none of this feels like a belief. It feels like common sense. It feels like reality. This was one of the major insights of Aaron Beck, the founder of cognitive therapy. Beck discovered that people often weren't responding to reality itself. They were responding to interpretations shaped by deeply held beliefs. And once a belief becomes established, something fascinating happens. The brain begins collecting evidence for it. If you believe you're unlucky, you'll notice every setback. If you believe you're not creative, you'll remember every failed idea. If you believe you're destined to fail, your attention naturally gravitates toward evidence that confirms it. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. The mind isn't trying to deceive you. It's trying to create consistency. The belief becomes the lens. And once you wear a lens long enough, you forget you're wearing one. You stop questioning it. You stop examining it. You stop seeing it as a belief at all. It becomes reality. But that raises a much more uncomfortable question. If beliefs shape the way you see the world, where did those beliefs come from in the first place? And what if some of the beliefs controlling your decisions today were installed before you were old enough to question them? Imagine hearing the same message hundreds of times before you're old enough to challenge it. Too sensitive, too emotional, too quiet, too slow, too much. At first, they're just words. But eventually, something changes. The brain stops hearing feedback and starts hearing identity. This is how many limiting beliefs begin. Not through careful reasoning, not through objective evidence, through repetition. A child doesn't have the psychological tools to analyze every message they receive. They don't ask, is this objectively true? Instead, they ask, what does this mean about me? And the answers to that question can quietly shape the next 20 years of their life. A child repeatedly criticized may conclude, I'm not capable. A child constantly compared to others may conclude, I'm not enough. A child whose creativity is dismissed may conclude, I'm not creative. These aren't logical conclusions. They're emotional adaptations. And over time, they become operating assumptions. The adult sitting in front of an opportunity isn't consciously thinking about childhood. They're simply experiencing a familiar discomfort that has existed for as long as they can remember. And neuroscience helps explain why. The brain is designed for efficiency. It builds pathways, shortcuts, patterns. The more often a thought is repeated, the more familiar the pathway becomes. This process is part of what neuroscientists call neuroplasticity. Repeated thoughts, repeated interpretations, repeated emotional reactions. Over time, they strengthen specific neural networks, which means a belief is not simply an idea. It's a well-traveled route, a default pathway the brain has used thousands of times before, and that's why changing beliefs feels so difficult. You're not simply replacing one thought with another. You're asking the brain to stop taking the familiar road and begin building a new one. And here's where things become surprisingly frustrating. Because once people realize beliefs are learned, they assume changing them should be simple. Just think differently, repeat affirmations, tell yourself a better story. But what psychologists discovered is far more interesting, because the mind does not update beliefs the way most people think it does. This is where millions of people get trapped. They discover a limiting belief. They learn where it came from. They become aware of it. And then nothing changes, because understanding a belief and changing a belief are two very different things. And what happens next reveals one of the biggest misconceptions in modern self-improvement. At some point, most people try to change a belief the same way. They try to think their way out of it. They repeat affirmations. They write positive statements. They create vision boards. They tell themselves a new story. I am confident. I am successful. I am capable. And for a moment, it feels like progress. Then reality arrives. The interview, the presentation, the first video upload, the difficult conversation, the business launch, and suddenly the old fear is back. The hesitation returns. The self-doubt returns. The avoidance returns. Many people interpret this as failure, but psychology suggests something else. The problem isn't that they didn't think positively enough. The problem is that beliefs are not updated primarily through words. They are updated through experience. Think about it this way. There's a huge difference between hearing that a bridge is safe and walking across it yourself. Your nervous system doesn't update because someone told you something. It updates because you lived through something. When someone who believes, I'll embarrass myself if I try stand in front of a mirror and repeats, I am confident, the brain receives a statement. But when that same person takes action, survives the experience, and discovers the feared outcome never happened, the brain receives evidence. And evidence changes things. This was one of the major insights behind Aaron Beck's work. Beck realized that arguing with beliefs often wasn't enough. People could understand that a belief was irrational and still behave as though it were true. Something more powerful was required. Reality, not imagined reality, not hoped for reality, experienced reality. And that leads directly to one of the most important discoveries in psychology. Because if beliefs are predictions, they can be tested. Here's the idea that changes everything. Most people wait to believe before they act. They wait to feel confident before speaking, ready before starting, qualified before applying, creative before creating, worthy before asking. And because they wait, nothing changes. The belief remains untouched. The prediction remains unchallenged. The cycle continues. Psychologists discovered something deeply counterintuitive. The sequence is often backwards. Most people think it works like this: believe, act, succeed. But reality often looks more like this: act, gather evidence, update, belief, then act again. This principle sits at the heart of what cognitive behavioral therapy calls behavioral experiments. The logic is simple. If a belief is a prediction about reality, test the prediction, not inside your head, in the real world. If you believe you're terrible at writing, Write something and show it to 3 people. If you believe everyone will reject your ideas, share one. If you believe you can't stay consistent, commit to 7 days instead of 7 months. The goal isn't proving yourself right. The goal isn't proving yourself wrong. The goal is gathering data, because something remarkable happens when reality enters the conversation. The belief is no longer operating uncontested. For the first time, it has competition. And here's the disturbing implication. If your beliefs influence your actions, and your actions create your experiences, then some people spend their entire lives collecting evidence for conclusions they reached when they were 8 years old. Not because those conclusions were true, because they were never tested. And the longer they go untested, the more they begin to feel like reality. Think about that. A child concludes, "I'm not creative." Years later, they avoid creative work. Because they avoid creative work, they never develop creative skills. The lack of skill becomes evidence. The evidence reinforces the belief, and the cycle continues. Not because the belief was accurate, because it was protected. And this is where the work of Bandura becomes so important. Bandura spent decades studying something called self-efficacy. In simple terms, a person's belief in their ability to succeed. What he discovered challenged a popular assumption. Most people believe confidence comes first. Bandura found that confidence often comes second. What creates confidence most reliably isn't positive thinking. It's what he called mastery experiences. Small experiences of success, small victories, small moments where reality contradicts the old story. The first video published, the first difficult conversation survived, the first client acquired, the first speech delivered, the first risk taken. Confidence doesn't magically appear beforehand. It grows afterward. The person who finally sends the email isn't fearless. They send the email, and then they become a little less afraid. The person who uploads the first video isn't confident. They upload the video, and then they become a little more confident. This distinction changes everything. Because if confidence follows action, waiting to feel confident first may be the very thing preventing confidence from ever arriving. And once you understand that, another question emerges. If experience changes beliefs, what happens when an experience directly contradicts a belief you've carried for years? Because sometimes a single moment can create a crack in a story that has controlled someone's life for decades. Dweck's research introduced a simple but powerful idea. People don't just differ in ability. They differ in what they believe ability means. Someone with a fixed mindset sees failure as evidence. Evidence that they aren't talented. Evidence that they aren't smart enough. Evidence that they should stop trying. Someone with a growth mindset sees the exact same event differently. Failure becomes information, feedback, data, something to learn from. Same experience, completely different interpretation. And because interpretation drives behavior, the belief itself begins shaping future outcomes. This is why beliefs matter so much. Not because they describe reality, but because they influence what you're willing to attempt. And what you're willing to attempt eventually determines the evidence your brain receives. The belief shapes behavior. Behavior shapes outcomes. Outcomes reinforce beliefs. And before long, a prediction begins looking an awful lot like destiny. But destiny isn't what psychologists see. What they see is a loop, and loops can be interrupted, sometimes gradually, and sometimes through an experience so powerful that the brain can no longer explain it away. And that brings us to one of the most fascinating concepts in psychology. Before you leave, I want you to do something. Not tomorrow, not next week, right now. Think of one belief that feels like a fact about yourself. Not a goal, not a dream, a belief. Maybe it's, I'm not creative, I'm not disciplined, I'm not confident, I always quit, I'm not the kind of person who succeeds. Then ask yourself a simple question. What evidence am I using to support that conclusion? And more importantly, when was the last time I actually tested it? Leave your answer in the comments. Because sometimes the belief that's been controlling your life for years survives for one reason. You've never given reality the chance to challenge it. If you enjoyed this exploration of psychology, behavior, and the hidden forces shaping human decisions, subscribe to Psyche Decoded. Because understanding the mind is one thing, learning how to stop being controlled by it is something else entirely. And that's exactly what we'll be exploring in the next video.